Welcome to the Applied Machine Learning for the Cybersecurity, a hands-on YouTube video tutorial series specially designed for the data and machine learning engineer to help them to solve the critical challenges in cybersecurity space by applying the modern machine learning and data engineering techniques. This is the first tutorial in the section 2 and 6th in the series, and if you haven't seen the previous video, then I would recommend you to watch it first for having the better understanding about the series before continuing any further on this path. And you can watch it either by clicking on the link given below in the description or by starting with the first tutorial in the playlist. A quick recap on what we had covered so far in section 1. First, we had a brief intro to the cybersecurity and learn about the different types of cyber threats and importance of machine learning in cybersecurity domain. Then, we had set up our development environment using Docker, Conda, kubectl and IntelliJ. After that, we had created the Docker images and discussed about the best practices around the Docker development and apply them in practice in order to optimize the size of the Docker image. Next, we looked into the labeling process using unsupervised learning aka clustering, and had also briefly touched vectorization and dimensional reduction techniques for processing the data. After that, we have looked into the clustering versus classification and also briefly touched different vectorization and normalization techniques. Then we had few exercises on malware classification where we had compared different classification model with the help of various performance matrices like accuracy, root mean square error, etc. And finally, we looked into the importance of AutoML framework, had discussed and compared few AutoML frameworks, and finally did one exercise on malware classification using H2 AutoML framework. The purpose of this section 1 was to introduce you to the cybersecurity domain and to know that how machine learning is playing important role in the cybersecurity. And the exercises we had done with the help of scikit-learn and Docker was merely to get our hand on machine learning development, but we haven't dealt with any real-time data and actual real-time implementation of machine learning pipeline. And in this exercise and in this section, we are going to cover the same. As previously discussed, we will cover the following topics in section 2. In the first video, we will briefly talk about Apache Spark and how we can use it to implement the machine learning use cases. In the same video, we will also discuss that how Apache Spark leverages Kubernetes for managing the cluster resources, and at last, we will set up our ML development environment to implement the cybersecurity use cases we had discussed in the past. In the second video, we will continue with our development on machine learning pipeline and will develop the feature engineering and machine learning jobs using the Spark and PySpark. In the third video, we will look into the packaging Scala and Python code for feature engineering and machine learning jobs and will deploy the same to the Spark cluster. In the fourth video, we will update the previously developed pipeline to use the XGBoost and H2 AutoML framework. In the fifth video, we will get our hand on GPU accelerated training using the CUDA primitives and will implement the ML pipeline using Rapids, which is the CUDA framework based library, and drop-in replacement for scikit-learn for GPU accelerated training. In the sixth video, we will discuss about the deep learning framework. We will compare different deep learning framework and will implement our malware analysis use case using the TensorFlow and Keras. And finally, in the seventh video, we will look into some of the important concepts needed to manage the machine learning pipelines in the production, and those are lifecycle management and experiment tracking for machine learning project, and infrastructure monitoring and troubleshooting for the bottlenecks in ML pipeline in production cluster. So let's begin our section 2 with brief intro to the Spark, but before that I would like to mention one thing, that Spark itself has very big learning curve and several YouTube videos of hours of duration would not be enough to cover the entire Spark. Here I am just having the quick recap on Spark, and we will discuss the portion of the Spark which is only relevant for our application. So what is Spark? Spark is the parallel distributed in-memory data processing engine which runs on the principle of dividing the workload into the smaller jobs and running them independently and parallelly, and then aggregating the result at the end. The same principle on which Apache Hadoop runs, but on contrary to Apache Hadoop, Apache Spark is in memory data processing engine, which means it will keep all its data into the memory till the point it can fit into all executor, and it will spill out the data only to the disk when it is unable to do so. That makes Spark extremely fast, and hence it can be used for both batch and real-time data processing. Spark uses master and slave architecture, that is one central coordinator and many distributed workers. Here the central coordinator is called as the driver. The driver runs on its own JVM. The driver communicates with potentially large number of distributed workers called as the executor. A Spark application is nothing but the combination of driver and executor processes. With the help of cluster manager, a Spark executor are launched on set of machine called as the nodes. Apart from its inbuilt standalone cluster manager, Sparks also support 3 different cluster managers, that is Yarn, Mesos and Kubernetes. The Apache Spark, which is often called as the Spark core, is just distributed in-memory engine, and what makes it special is the 4 out-of-box libraries it provides on top of core functionalities, which are Spark SQL for invoking the Spark API using the SQL-like syntax, something similar to the Apache Hayo; Spark Streaming, a real-time stream processing API for the Spark; MLlib, which has many useful machine learning libraries built on top of it; and fourth one is the GraphX for graph and graph parallel computation. Although the Spark MLlib don't have as many as algorithm as scikit-learn has, but it has incorporated many most commonly used machine learning and natural processing algorithm, which makes it ideal for feature engineering and machine learning workloads, and can also be integrated with the third-party libraries like XGBoost and H2O, and with that we can build very robust machine learning pipeline using the Apache Spark. Also, another cool thing about the Spark is it supports for the high-level API in the various languages, that is Java, Scala, Python and R, and hence it is widely accepted between various developer communities. Few important terms and concepts which often comes into the play during the Spark development are: first, Spark context and Spark session. Spark context is the entry point for the Spark application. The most important step of any Spark driver application is to generate the Spark context, which allows the Spark application to access the Spark cluster with the help of resource manager. As we can see in the above diagram, that how Spark context is associated with the Spark driver program and accessing the worker node resources with the help of cluster manager. Further, with the adoption of the Spark into the industry, the need for the multi-tenancy came into the picture, which was very difficult to manage with the Spark context. In fact, Spark contexts do not support the multi-tenancy feature, and that's where the Spark session came into the picture in Spark 2.0 and above, which helps to isolate the Spark process per user, where each individual user can maintain its own session but still connecting to the same Spark context. Next is the RDD, data frame and data set. Spark RDD stands for the Resilient Distributed Data Set. It's a read-only and partition collection of the record. RDD is the fundamental data structure of the Spark. It allows programmer to perform in-memory computation on large cluster in fault-tolerant manner, thus helps to speed up the Spark's task. Spark data frame. Data frame in the Spark is the abstraction over the RDD, which allows it to organize the data into the tabular format like SQL tables, which allows developer to work with the data in traditional way, just like they used to do with the Hayo on Hadoop. Spark dataset. Dataset in Spark are the extension of the data frame API, which provide the typeset object-oriented programming interface. Next, Spark transformers and action. Transformations are kind of operations which transform the RDD data from one form into the another. When we apply the transformation on the RDD, we get the new RDD with the transformed data. A point to be noted here that when we apply the transformation on RDD, it will not perform the operation immediately, and it will just create the DAG, that is the directed acyclic graph, into the memory. About the actions, unlike transformation, we just create the execution plan, that is DAG. Actions are the operations which actually get executed when they are called. And at last, Spark driver, executor and cluster manager. As we had discussed, Spark follows the master-slave architecture, where we have one central coordinator and multiple distributed worker nodes. The central coordinator is called as a Spark driver, which communicate with the worker node with the help of cluster manager. Each worker node consists of one or more executor which are responsible for running the task. Executor register themselves with the driver. The driver has all the information about the executor at all the time. The working combination of the driver and executors is known as the Spark application. The Spark application is launched with the help of the cluster manager, which can either one of the following. First, Spark standalone mode, which comes default out of box with the Spark binaries. The second one is the Hadoop Yarn, which is the synonyms for the yet another resource manager. Is a popular resource manager for Hadoop, and the same can be used to manage the Spark resources. The third one is the Mesos, which is a cluster manager for Spark application developed by the UC Berkeley during the same time with the Spark development. And the last one is the Kubernetes, which we are going to discuss in more detail short. So what is Kubernetes? And one line definition of the Kubernetes is the container orchestration platform. As of now, you all must have familiar with the Docker and must have got your hands around the developing and running the Docker containers in the previous labs in the section 1, where we used to run the single Docker container using the Docker run command. The single Docker container represents the single process, which is okay for doing the small POC, but in real time hundreds of or even thousands of such containers would be needed to achieve the scalability and failover scenario, and we can't use the single Docker run command to spawn all of them, and need something robust which could orchestrate the lifespan of this container, can monitor their failover and scaling need, and can allocate and deallocate the resources like CPU and RAM. The purpose of the Kubernetes is exactly meant to provide these capabilities along with the additional DevOps benefit it gives, which makes development and deployment lifecycle shorter and more controlled. To understand how Kubernetes is able to provide these capabilities, it makes sense to look into the Kubernetes architecture and how it is designed and organized. At high level, Kubernetes can be visualized as the system built into the layers, with each higher layer abstracting the complexities found in the lower one. At its base, Kubernetes consists of the individual physical or virtual machines running in the clusters using the shared network, where each machine in the cluster is given a role within the Kubernetes ecosystem. One or group of few servers functions as the master server. This server acts as a gateway for cluster by exposing the API for users and client. It does health checks for the other servers and schedule the workload. The master server acts as the primary point of contact with the cluster, and it is responsible for most of the centralized logic Kubernetes provide. The other machines in the cluster are designated as the worker node, which are responsible for doing the actual task and receives the instruction from master, and responsible for accepting and running the workload using the local and external resources. Each node need to be equipped with the container runtime like Docker. The nodes receives the work instruction from the master server and creates and destroys the containers accordingly, adjusting the network rules to route and forward the network traffic appropriately. From the Apache Spark 2.3 and onwards, Spark also started supporting Kubernetes as the cluster manager, which means we could replace the Yarn or Mesos with the Kubernetes. Although from the Spark's perspective, it hardly makes any difference whether we run our workload on Yarn, Mesos or Kubernetes, but using the Kubernetes gives us the following advantages. First, the simple administration. Kubernetes allowed unification of the infrastructure management under the single type of cluster for multiple types of workload, which means that alongside the Spark, you can also run other web application, REST services, notebooks, etc. In traditional Spark on the Yarn world, you need to have the dedicated Hadoop cluster for running the Spark processing and something else for running the web application and REST service. Next is the workload isolation, meaning that you can prevent the workload running in the cluster from interfering with each other because they will remain in their own namespace. Next is the better resource management, as Kubernetes scheduler is responsible for allocating the workload to the desired node. We don't have to worry about it anymore. Also, scaling a cluster up and down is quite easy because it's just a matter of adding or removing the VMs to the cluster. Next feature is the easier dependency management. Managing the dependency in Yarn is quite challenging and type consuming, as packages has to exist on all nodes in the cluster, which makes the isolation, that is making different versions of the same software like TensorFlow 1 and TensorFlow 2 coexist on the same node difficult, and updating the environment is become quite challenging. Spark on the Kubernetes and specifically Docker makes this whole process a lot easier. Kubernetes orchestrates Docker container, which acts as the placeholder for the compute operation. This containers not only packages the code required to execute the workload, but also packages all its dependency it needed to run the code. The last but not least is the managed Kubernetes service in public cloud. If you are using the public cloud, then majority of them have some form of managed Kubernetes service. Like in case of Amazon, it's a EKS, or in case of Google, it's a GKE, or in case of Microsoft Azure, it's the AKS. And I believe other cloud provider also might have some counterpart of the managed Kubernetes. With the help of managed Kubernetes service, the whole headache of the server and infrastructure management would be taken care of, and we would mainly be focusing on the application development. But in non-Kubernetes environment, we would ourselves will be responsible for server and infrastructure management, which become quite challenging when it comes to the large clusters of hundreds or above nodes. With all those advantages, running Spark on Kubernetes is definitely a winner over running Spark on Yarn or running Spark on Mesos. With this, I am concluding this discussion, and I hope that by now you must have the better understanding on the Spark on the Kubernetes and how it is beneficial to run the Spark on Kubernetes. In next topic, we will actually start building Docker images for running the Spark on Kubernetes. But before that, I would like to mention few things. First, about the Kubernetes. The installation and configuration of the Kubernetes infrastructure is out of scope of this series. I am hoping either you already have fair understanding on Kubernetes and already know how to create and manage the Kubernetes cluster. For rest of the series, I am going to use the Amazon EKS service, but it's not the mandatory requirement to use EKS to follow this series, and you may choose your own managed Kubernetes from the other cloud provider like GKE from the Google Cloud, or even the Minikube on your local personal computer, as long as it's powerful enough. We are going to use kubectl for Kubernetes administration, and what kind of Kubernetes cluster we are using behind the scene will be abstracted in rest of the course, and I am hoping that at least you get the kubectl configured and hooked to your Kubernetes cluster by yourself. Once done, you should see the default Kubernetes service is running by using the kubectl get service and kubectl get nodes command. Now, let's start with our Spark on Kubernetes lab, and I hope that you have already cloned the Git repo associated with the series in the previous section. But if you haven't, then please do the same using the following Git URL in the description. The one last important thing which I would like to mention is the Docker Hub, without which our current development and deployment lifecycle cannot be completed. As of now, the Docker images we were creating were getting stored into the local image cache, and the Docker used to pick up these images from the local cache during the execution of Docker run command. But going forward, we cannot use the local image repo for developing the Spark application in Kubernetes, as Kubernetes won't recognize the local image cache, and it needs something centrally globally available repository to store our the Docker images. One such repo is the Docker Hub, which is the community repo for uploading the Docker images, and we will use the same throughout this course. In the real life, when we are working in the corporate environment, then in most cases we would be using JFrog Artifactory instead of Docker Hub. But for the purpose of this video series, we will rely on the Docker Hub. So let's visit the hub.docker.com and create your account if you haven't. Once you sign in and log in, you will see all the images you have uploaded so far. This is how my Docker Hub page looks like, but in your case, it might vary based on what you have uploaded so far. You can also search publicly available images here and can refer them while building our own custom images. For example, as we can see here, TensorFlow public image being uploaded by some community member. We can also see the tags and the description about these images and can pull the images based on the appropriate tag. It's up to the individual user whether we would like to share our images or mark them as the private for the individual use. So once your Docker Hub account has been created, you have to log into it via console using the Docker login command. That way, Docker can recognize your Docker Hub repository when you will use the Docker push command to upload the images. Once logged in, you can use the Docker search command to search the images in your or someone else's community repo. Next, Let's navigate to our section 2, chapter 1 folder and start understanding and building our first Docker image for the Spark on Kubernetes. So let's open the Spark base image Docker file and pay attention to these two important things. First, the version of the libraries we are going to use for building our Docker image, and the second one is the Docker image size optimization using multi-stage Docker image technique, which we had discussed in the last section but didn't apply it in the practice. Regarding the library version, in this series we would be using the Spark 3.0.1, which is the latest version of the Spark at the time I am recording this video. Another important thing to consider, the compatibility of the Hadoop and AWS SDK we would be using. A single variation or mismatch in these compatibilities and it might take hours to fix it. A Spark, Hadoop and AWS combination is very sensitive towards the version compatibility, and just be careful while picking up the right combination. The next important concept to understand here is the multi-stage Docker image. With the multi-stage Docker build, you use multiple from statement in your Docker file. Each from instruction can use a different base and each of them begins a new stage of the build. You can selectively copy the artifact from one stage to another, leaving behind everything else, which tremendously helps to optimize the size of the Docker image. Multi-stage Docker image is very important concept to learn, because as we are moving forward, soon the image's size will start bloating exponentially, and multi-stage Docker image will help us a lot to keep it under control. Apart from this, the rest of the Docker commands are just the standard sequence of the instruction to configure the Spark to work with the AWS S3. And at this point, I would like to bring this thing to your attention that I am going to use AWS S3 for storing the raw and processed data in our ML pipeline. For those who are not familiar with Amazon S3, it's called as the Simple Storage Service, a managed service offered by the Amazon Web Services that provide the object storage through a web service interface, REST API and AWS CLI. In order to follow the underlying tutorials and notebooks, it is mandatory requirement to have the AWS S3 access, and please provision the same if you haven't. AWS S3 service is ridiculously cheap and it may cost you only few pennies for using it for the duration of the demo. Now let's build our first Docker image for Apache Spark. The above Spark image that we have just built is good for running any Spark program, but we also need the Jupyter Notebook in order to develop our Spark code. But the Jupyter Notebook do not support the Scala language out of box, which we needed to write down some feature engineering code. And hence we are also installing this Pylon kernel, which will let Jupyter Notebook compile the Scala code for the Spark. So let's build our second Docker image and push it into the Docker Hub repo. Now that we have our Jupyter with the Spark image has been pushed to the Docker Hub, it's time to run it in the Kubernetes pod. But before that, let's try to understand few Kubernetes terminologies we are going to use throughout the course. First is the nodes. The nodes are the worker machines in the Kubernetes, and it can be either physical or virtual depending on the cluster. Each node is managed by the master. Kubernetes cluster consists of one or multiple such nodes. Next is the namespace. A namespace can be considered as the logically isolated virtual clusters inside the main Kubernetes cluster. This can be there can be multiple namespaces in the same Kubernetes cluster, and namespace provide a different scope, which means that using the combination of the object and the namespace, each object gets a unique identity across the cluster. It helps a lot when multiple teams are using the same cluster and there is a potential ambiguity. It can be seen as the virtual wall between the multiple clusters. Next is the Kubernetes service. Kubernetes service is the abstract way to expose the application running on the Kubernetes pod. With Kubernetes service, you don't need to modify your application to use the service discovery mechanism. Next is the pod, the basic unit of the Kubernetes. While Kubernetes is considered a container orchestration platform, its true building block is the pod. According to the Kubernetes documentation, pods are the smallest deployable unit of computing that can be created and managed in the Kubernetes. So, What exactly is the pod? Essentially, a pod is a layer of encapsulation for set of containers that are typically co-located together from application perspective. For example, consider a Spring Boot application running inside the cluster that is coupled with the Nginx container as the network proxy. When scaling the instances of our Spring Boot container, we would also like to scale the instances of our Nginx container as well. Pods provides us exactly these functionalities. Next is the replica set and deployments. Pods allows us to group the set of containers as the application unit, but in real life we would need many such units to address both scalability and failure requirements, and that's where Kubernetes replica set comes into the picture to manage the scaling of the pod. While replica set have capabilities to manage the pod and scale the instances of the certain pod, they don't have the ability to perform a rolling update and some other features. Instead, this functionality is managed by the Kubernetes deployment objects. Next is the volume. Volume is essentially a directory accessible to all containers running in the pod. In contrast to the container local file system, the data in the volume is preserved across the container restarts. Let's deploy our first Kubernetes application and expose it via the Kubernetes service. And now let's open the Jupyter deployment.yaml file from the chapter 1 folder. If you look at these three dashes, it's a separator for the Kubernetes object declaration, and each one of these Kubernetes object above and below the separator can go in its own YAML file or can be combined into the one single YAML file, just like we did it in this case. So the first object we see here is the Kubernetes deployment, which will deploy the pods to the Kubernetes using this image, which we will build and push to the Docker Hub in the beginning. Take a look at the container section. It's a single container pod. The second object is the Kubernetes service, whose job is to expose the container running inside the pod to the other Kubernetes object or to the external world. In order to expose the service outside of the Kubernetes cluster, we need to expose these services with the help of Kubernetes load balancer object, and that's what this third object is meant for. The last one is the headless service, which is being used when we want to assign the fixed DNS name to the Kubernetes objects. Now it's time to execute the Kubernetes YAML file with the kubectl and verify the objects and their states. As you can see, currently we do not have any pods or the containers running inside the Kubernetes namespace except the out-of-box default Kubernetes service. Let's run our Kubernetes deployment with the help of Jupyter deployment create.sh. It's nothing but the sequence of execution of the kubectl command. Let's check the status of the pods and services. Once the pod is running state, we can access the same via load balancer URL exposed via load balancer service on port 8888. As you can see that we are able to launch the Jupyter on load balancer port 8888, which is being exposed by the service. And if you take a closer look at notebook kernel, you would find that we have now two kernels, one for running the PySpark program using the Python, and the second one is running the Spark job using the Scala. So now let's download the dataset from the given URL in the description below or associated readme file with the chapter. It's compressed zip file about an GB in size, and after unzipping, the size of the dataset is about 8 GB, which is considerable size of the dataset to run the demo application. Beware that from here onwards we are in the big data territory, but at the smaller scale. Once downloaded, unzip and upload the dataset to the AWS S3 bucket. You are free to choose your own AWS S3 bucket name and path. In my case, I have already uploaded the dataset and it looks something like this. Next, let's create the AWS IAM user having the S3 upload and download permissions and have the access key and secret key ready for the same. Although I am quickly going to show you how to do that, but as I previously mentioned that you must have some familiarity with the AWS, as it's a mandatory requirement to follow this course step by step. Go to the services, search for the IAM service and navigate to it. Once there, click on the user section and create the new user. Assign S3 permission to it, and once created, note down the access and secret key for the same. Now let's open our Spark notebook in the associated chapter and see how to run the demo Spark application on the Kubernetes. The first cell in the notebook is to stop any running default Spark job in the environment, as we are going to launch the same with our custom configuration. The next cell shows the imports related to the Spark, and if you take a closer look at the syntax, you will find that it's based on the Scala, as we are going to use the Scala for feature engineering job in the Spark application. Spark underscore namespace is actually the Kubernetes namespace we would like to use our Spark application to run into. SA is the name of service account we have created in previous step. After creating the Spark context, you could see that it had spawned the requested executors which are running as the Kubernetes pod. It may not be necessary that we would always get the number of executors we have requested, and it depends on the available cluster resources. Now let's create the Spark data frame by reading the CSV data from AWS S3. We had already seen the Panda data frame in our previous section and have used it for performing the data analysis using the scikit-learn. But unlike the Pandas and scikit-learn, which runs on the single node machine, Spark data frame is distributed. What does that mean? The data in the Spark data frame will be distributed and get processed parallelly across the several computer nodes, and once the processing is done, will finally get merged when it times to save it. Let's run some aggregation logic on the Spark data frame and display the result. Till this point, we had created our first Spark application to fetch the data from AWS S3 and running the simple aggregation logic on it by submitting the job on the Kubernetes cluster via Jupyter Notebook. With this, I am concluding the current chapter, and I hope that you have understood that how Apache Spark works on the Kubernetes. In the next video, we will see some more advanced use cases of the Spark, and at last, please leave your comment and let me know your feedback about the current video, and please subscribe the channel if you haven't. That way you can always get the first handle on any upcoming videos as soon as it's been released. Thank you and have a nice time.